Why do you hate discovery? What can we do differently? Talk to us.
Leaders, CEOs, CROs, they all say this. We've got a problem with discovery. No, you don't. You got a problem because you're anchoring on discovery, and that's like you think is the center pin of your entire sales process. And when anything starts going sideways, you just think, oh, we've got a problem with discovery, because if we were doing great discovery, we would have qualified them out earlier. Maybe our pipeline would be a lot smaller, but it'd be healthier.
It's time. You can't keep doing the same old thing anymore. You have to buy a new software. You begin the research, but at some point you begin the sales process. And that's when it starts. All the questions. How many users do you need? What's your budget? What's the real pain you're feeling in your business? It's called discovery, and it does little to help the buyer. And according to today's guest, discovery deserves to die, at least in its current form. Doug Landis is a growth partner at Emergence Capital, where he consults on all things go-to-market for early-stage B2B companies. Before that, he was VP of Sales Productivity, then Chief Storyteller at Box. He's done his fair share of vetting and buying software solutions for revenue teams. And he's got a ton to say about what your sellers should be doing instead of playing 21 questions with their buyers. Make sure you stick around to see what Doug and Kyle have to say about artificial intelligence and its impact on go-to-market motions too.
Hey, Kyle, one quick thing, if I can grab a minute. What's going on, everybody? Devin Reed here, sales pro turned head of content here at Clary. And I want to take a quick second to invite you to our brand new virtual event. It's called Charge. Charge is a virtual event filled with thought leadership and practical advice for revenue pros who want to turn obstacles into opportunities, regardless of market conditions. This is a half-day virtual event that starts with a keynote. It has a leadership track, it has a practitioner track, and the content is highly relevant, highly actionable, and it's all about finding new ways to win in 2023. If you attend, you will get the blueprint for running revenue in 2023 and see what's really working in today's climate from the boardroom to the front line. Hurry up. Registration is completely free. You can sign up now. The event is happening on June 6th. Hope to see you there. Kyle, back over to you.
I'm Kyle Coleman, sales pro turned SVP of marketing at Clary. Run Revenue is the show where revenue pros learn to stop revenue leak, achieve revenue precision, and grow their companies and careers.
This is Run Revenue Show with Kyle Coleman.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Run Revenue Show. I'm so excited to be joined today by my friend, Doug Landis from Emergence Capital. Doug, how you doing today?
What's happening, Kyle? Just so everybody knows, Kyle and I think both go to the same hairstylist. Like we have the same come over.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. The same people at Great Clips take care of both of us. Doug, thanks for joining us today. We have a very provocative but very meaningful topic, which is the death of discovery. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But first, I want to hear what you are hearing across your portfolio companies, what you're hearing from founders, from entrepreneurs. What are some of the big patterns, good or bad, that you're seeing in today's environment?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot happening. But before we get there, let me give you a little brief on who I am, who Emergence is, why I'm having this conversation with you, and why I think it's actually really, really relevant to all of your participants or the audience, the greater Clary audience here. Doug Landis, growth partner here at Emergence Capital. We're an early stage B2B SaaS focused venture capital firm. Been around for about 20 years. We made a bet 20 years ago that all software was going to move to the cloud. Our first bet was Salesforce. I think that was a pretty good bet. Pretty smart play. Salesforce, Viva, Box, Yammer, SuccessFactors, Steelbrick, ServiceMax.
Very impressive. Very impressive.
I think we've done all right. I think we've done all right. So, and the interesting thing is my role is like kind of the best of all worlds in that. I mean, I sit on our investment committee, help us to source deals and do due diligence on deals. But more specifically, I'm like free go-to-market consulting for our portfolio companies, right? So right after we invest, help them figure out how they're going to scale from 1 to 4 to 12, 24, 48, 96, and beyond. In some cases, it goes a lot faster. Right now, things are going a little slower, as you can imagine. So getting back to your question, what am I seeing? What am I noticing? It's hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. In fact, I just had a call this morning, and one of the things we were trying to ascertain is what percentage now of our revenue is coming from existing customers versus net new customers, right? In the early days, it predominantly, we'll call it Series A, it's like 100% net new because you don't really have any renewals happening. By the time you get to Series B, maybe it's 98% and 2%, maybe 90 and 10. We like to see it grow a lot faster because what that tells us is your, net revenue retention numbers are really high because your existing customers are expanding. That's all a good sign. Helps you to grow, also helps you to raise additional capital at much higher valuations. All that's great. The reality in today's environment, everything's really hard. Generating pipeline is really hard. Even expanding in your existing customer base is really hard because at the end of the day, the risk tolerance for everyone is a lot different. And it's largely predicated on the fact that our customers are struggling. And so therefore our customers are shoring up their strategy and it's shifting quite a bit. And one of the things we were talking about in the beginning is like what I'm seeing a lot across the companies is a reassessing of our ICP, right? So are we really going after the right customers? And how do we know? If I were a CRO right now, I'd be like, I want data on every single deal that we've won in the last 6 months. And I want you to show me the pattern of every single one of those customers. And then I want you to show me where they exist, where the new ones exist across the country or around the globe. Because what I think what we're seeing is like some companies are having to totally shift their ICP. And as a result, their buyers are actually changing. This kind of happened a little bit in COVID, but it's definitely happening right now. CFOs are getting involved in deals all the way down to $10,000.
Right. And early.
Right. Yeah, super early. Or they're saying like, hey, Kyle, if you're going to bring a deal to me, here's everything that I need to be in that kind of business plan, if you will. Whereas before it'd be like, okay, we're just going to have a side conversation and I trust you and go for it. So, just things are different. Things are a lot different. And so messaging has to change, right? We can't use the old outbound prospecting tactics of like just kind of spray and pray.
Right.
I think you're going to see a real uptick in ABM activities, both for net new customers and also your existing customers. Right. You got to nurture those existing customers. You can't afford to lose any of them whatsoever. So if that means you got to give them a year for free, do it. Don't lose them because the time and the effort it takes to get a brand new one, there's just a lot of unknown to it.
You just unpacked so many useful things, Doug. But one that I want to drill into first is this understanding of who is actually buying.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you preach, and certainly I've heard you speak about in the past, Doug, is the importance of a revenue operations partner for the CRO or for the head of sales or whoever it is. Talk to us about the importance of Rev Ops and maybe give a little guidance on when do you hire for that role if you're an early stage company?
Now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Series A company. We've just invested in you. You've got, let's say you've got 20 employees, you're about $1 million in revenue-ish, right? That's kind of like the makeup of your typical Series A. I literally will tell them, okay, we got to hire Rev Ops. And they're like, well, we need a head of sales. Like, okay, cool. We still need Rev Ops.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. If I'm asking you to let's look at the data. I want to look at sales velocity. I want to know the time in stage for every single one of your deals. I want to know the activity levels on every single one of your active deals. What are we actually doing that's working? I want to know forecast accuracy on a weekly and monthly basis. That kind of data, if you're a VP of sales in an early stage company, you're going to pull your hair out trying to figure out how to extrapolate all of that. Your Rev Ops partner, as you said it, I like to think of your Rev Ops partner as your co-founder of the sales organization.
I love that.
That's my definition. I want them to be able to step in, if I'm on a trip or I decide to take some time off, God forbid. I want them to be able to run the organization, run all my forecast calls, make important decisions, and run the business from a metrics perspective that, how it should be run, not just like, everything's frothy and up and to the right as it was for 14 years. So the interesting thing about this environment is it's new for so many people.
Right.
Now, this is all gray. So guess what? This is my third time going through one of these crazy ups and downs. And so I've seen the movie before.
Yeah. So a really good segue into some bad habits, Doug, that you see revenue leaders or revenue teams fall into in those frothy times when everything is up and to the right, when money is cheap. What are some bad habits that you see and how do you go about correcting them?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, I love this question because I'm going to piss some people off. I know it. But that's okay. Kyle said at the beginning, this is going to be somewhat provocative. But I think some bad habits are we get as sales leaders and revenue leaders, we get lazy with assessing talent.
Ooh.
It's crazy. I just had this conversation the other day with one of our VPs. She just stepped in this company's Series C. We hired a new sales leader. She's new. And I was like, so what's your process for assessing the team? Because it's so critical. If you're a new sales leader that steps in, whether there's one rep or there's 10 or there's 50, you've got to assess the talent you have and trying to determine, well, who are the people that I need to cut? Who are the ones that can execute, that can follow the plan, that follow the playbook? Who are the ones that are coachable, that are open to my coaching, because it's going to be different than what they maybe have had before. So talent is a really, really, really big area for opportunity, I'm going to call it. I'm not necessarily going to call it a mistake. I think the mistake is hanging on to people who just aren't doing a great job and they're just not the right fit for this environment. Hang on to them for too long. The other thing is, I'll say this environment is different, right? And so, and I've said it 100 times, people need to actually go out and sell. And it kind of reminds me of the days of like, you got to get back to your fundamentals.
Yeah.
Core fundamentals, having real meaningful business conversations, doing your homework, just like instead of this, like, let me just spray and pray and call one person in the organization that's my target persona and doing a fancy demo or using demo tools or whatever it may be. Like, no, we got to get back to the basics, because as buyers, we care more deeply about any sort of conversation we're going to have with somebody, because it's directly connected and associated with risk.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone's biggest fear right now is losing their job.
Yes. Everyone's
biggest fear. If all of a sudden, Kyle, let's say you're my boss, you're like, hey, we got to find a better way to kind of do lead routing. I feel like things are getting, lost in the cracks. I'm like, all right, shoot, I got to go find a lead routing solution. Okay. I'm going to take my time, because I can't afford to screw it up and get it wrong. Because, I feel like we only have so much money to spend. And if this is a high priority for you, and it's a really high priority for me, so I'm going to be really diligent and probably a lot more thoughtful than I ever was before.
Exactly. Yeah. That fear of messing up is the thing that's controlling so much buyer behavior these days. And we had Matt Dixon on the podcast a couple of weeks back, and he was talking all through the Jolt effect principles. And that fear of messing up is so important to understand and be able to diagnose right now, because taking that risk for me as a buyer, there are huge repercussions, as you just said, if you get it wrong.
It's FOMO, right? It's now the hot buzzword right now. But so here's the thing, though, that I would suggest. Acknowledge it. It's like the new elephant in the room. You cannot let that go. You've got to acknowledge the fact that even just having this conversation, even just raising your hand and saying, I'm sniffing around for a lead routing solution, you're going to get bombarded. The good sellers who really truly understand how to have a real meaningful business conversation know how to address that up front. They know how to address the fact that, look, Kyle, I recognize the fact that making a decision like this might be a massive risk.
Right.
You'll notice that I use the word might really important, but it might be a massive risk to you, because what happens if this doesn't work? I can always say, well, what happens if it does work? Oh, you're going to be a hero. Like, no, forget about that. Well, let's just acknowledge the fact that what Kyle's really thinking about is like, what if I get this wrong? I'm not thinking about what if this goes well, really, to be honest. I'm thinking about what if this goes wrong? What are the implications there? Am I willing to advocate? Am I willing to put this forward? Am I willing to take a swing at this?
And the interesting part, Doug, is that a lot of sellers go to such great lengths to prove the quote unquote value case of if it goes right. And they spend no time on discussing how to mitigate risk or how to take risk off the table or how to just make the buyer more comfortable getting to that decision point. And they think, well, the ROI or the value case or whatever it is going to be so compelling. How the hell could they say no to this? The proof is right there.
It's such BS. You want to talk about a mistake that I see everybody makes? And by the way, this happens in really frothy environments and it's carried over. Look, ROI calculators, business value assessments, all that stuff. CFOs, they don't care. They don't care. And because the problem is if you're like, oh, you're going to get, 100 hours a month back across your organization, and you're going to get all this new productivity gains. Guess what? That's not what gets people to make buying decisions. What gets people to make buying decisions, what creates urgency, is focusing on cost, loss, and suffering. Those three things, cost, loss, and what's it costing you by sticking with what you're currently doing every single day? What are you losing out on? What kind of money are you leaving on the table? That stuff is real and it's tangible. It's like, whoa, well, that's interesting. You paint this picture of this promised land of all these positive things. I don't understand that.
That's right.
And honestly, half the time, more than half the time, 80% of the time, I don't believe it.
And the other sort of counterintuitive thing is that those value cases that say you're going to get 10x ROI, that puts a lot of pressure on me, the buyer, to then go and get 10x ROI and say to the CFO 6 months, 12 months later, like, look, I did it. Like, that's a really high bar.
And what happens if you don't?
Exactly.
What happens if you don't get 10x ROI? A CFO is like, okay, you told me you're going to get 10x ROI. And okay, so maybe you get 5, maybe you get 6, but it's not 10.
Right.
You put your neck out on line for something that, again, it's not totally proven. And that's the other thing too, is like, you as a seller, I don't believe you because you're a seller. I tell you what, though, if you can get me in touch with Sarah Franklin, CMO, president over at Salesforce, and she just experienced the same thing, and she got 10x ROI, way more believable.
Great story, 100%. And that goes back to your point about the fundamentals, Doug. And something that I've heard you say is that in the frothy environments, when frankly selling is just easier, what ends up happening is that people get lazy, and that laziness translates to revenue leak when times are a little more difficult. And one of those big areas of laziness is discovery. So this is the topic that we're going to spend some time on here, the death of discovery. And a lot of people use discovery as shorthand for basically not doing any work and then showing up to a call and expecting the buyer to lay every single thing out there on a silver platter for them. So I'm just going to ask you a very broad prompt and let you riff. Why do you hate discovery? What can we do differently? Talk to us.
Well, I mean, Kyle, you get it. So look, you're a buyer of technology, you're a CMO. You get sold to all the time. And look, one of the things I want us to be careful about, you want to talk about mistakes people make right now? And I hear this leaders, CEOs, CROs, VPs of sales, they all say this. Well, we've got a problem with discovery. No, you don't. You got a problem because you're anchoring on discovery, and that's you think is the center pin of your entire sales process. And when anything starts going sideways, you just think, oh, we've got a problem with discovery, because if we were doing great discovery, we would have qualified them out earlier. Maybe our pipeline would be a lot smaller, but it'd be healthier. Okay, so it's just something it's almost all responses point to discovery. Unfortunately, my fundamental issue with discovery is it's used improperly. So this is why I say discovery is dead, and it should be dead. And this is why I'm very passionate about this, is because as a buyer, and unfortunately as a seller, the moment you hear discovery is a stage. Oh gosh, drives me bananas, because all of a sudden it triggers the wrong behaviors, right? It's the same thing with qualification. If you're an SDR, if you run SDRs and own SDR teams, if you're an SDR and we give you here's your qualification criteria, BANT, temp, ANM, NEAT, I don't care what the hell it is, whatever acronym of the flavor of the month you're going to use, all you're doing is forcing them in a behavior that is, I must ask these questions in order to check the box to determine whether or not you're a fit. Well, guess what? That same behavior gets transferred over to an AE. And an AE now, instead of it being called qualification, now it's called discovery. But the problem is that discovery is incredibly selfish. So CROs out there, I want you to stop using the word discovery, one, as your default problem solver. And number two, I want you to get away from the idea of discovery, because discovery is more for you, the seller, versus me, the buyer. But first of all, 80% of the time, most of you sellers out there don't even set expectations properly. If you're going to ask me a series of questions, set my expectations and ask for permission to do so. Right? Because oftentimes what happens is we're in a conversation and then I just start peppering you. Right. And then next thing you know, you're like, well, when is this going to end? One, when am I going to actually see something of value or get something in return for everything that I've just given you? And so by default as buyers, we're wired and we're trained to tell you what you want to hear, deflect, push for a demo, and basically get off the call as quickly as possible so that I can go talk to my peers and go do my own research instead of talking to a salesperson. Kyle, I'm pretty sure you do the same thing. We all do it subconsciously. I know you don't want to admit it, but it's just what we do. It's But now here's the thing. If someone shows up to a call, they're prepared. They've got, our good buddy John Barrow says, they've got a really high give a factor, give a crap factor.
There you go.
Try not to cuss. They bring examples of other people just like you that they've spoken to, because they do this all day, every day. It's if I sell to CMOs, I've probably talked to 2,000 CMOs over the course of a year or two. Hopefully I have. If I haven't, then that's a whole nother problem. And if that's the case, I've learned a lot from all these CMOs that I've spoken to. Why am I not bringing that to the conversation with you versus hey, you've got this problem, we've got this solution, I want to tell you all about it. So the way I think about discovery is I want people to change away discovery from, I want everyone to move away from discovery to business conversations. And it's interesting how we've never really talked about how to have a business conversation. Oftentimes we call it kind of business acumen, but I think business acumen is a little misleading too, because it's business acumen is about how do you read a 10K or a 10Q and do analysis on a company, and all that's really interesting. And by the way, with ChatGPT and OpenAI and these large language models, you can do research on a company in seconds. And they can tell you exactly what's going on in the industry, where they stand, et cetera. So that's the fun part. But how do you then take that and bring it to a conversation
That's
to
right.
have a real business conversation versus like, I'm going to pepper you with a whole slew of questions. That's the gift, right? And this is what CROs I want you to focus on.
Exactly, Doug. And I'm proud to say that this is something that we recognized pretty early on in my tenure at Clary, is that we have this expertise. We have this revenue expertise by speaking with the most forward-thinking revenue leaders on the planet. Now, it's not about them using our platform. That's not what any other buyer is necessarily going to care about. They're going to care about what the outcomes are that we're helping drive. And so what we did is we created this framework that internally we call SGI, Strategic Growth Initiatives. Where are companies, and specifically where are revenue leaders, making bets for growth, and how can Clary help in service of those goals? They're expanding internationally. They're rolling out a new product line. They're undergoing an M&A. They're, whatever it may be, that are real tangible outcomes that matter to a revenue leader, because then I can go and read the 10K or go and read the press release. A company just gets funding and I can go and listen to a CEO interview and I can say, hey, your CEO just said that you've got a nice presence in the US and you're using this round of funding to go and expand into Europe. We just helped XYZ other company and other CRO do that exact thing. Are you interested in learning more? And of course they're interested in learning more because it's an outcome that actually matters to them. That's how you can overcome that credibility gap that exists a lot of times between a buyer and a seller, is by having that preparation and having that strong POV.
It's a prepared mind. And this hypothesis, I call this basically a hypothesis-based selling, right? At the end of the day, because here's the thing, like, even though you're a CMO, you're not suffering from all the exact same problems that all the other CMOs that I talk to. So I'm building a hypothesis of what your world might be like, what technology you might be using, how you might be thinking about this as a priority in all the stack of other things you're working on or focusing on, how you might be thinking about whether or not this is something you even want to spend any time on. So there's a whole lot of assumptions that we make when we're talking to somebody. Even the example you just gave, it's like, yeah, you're right. We were thinking about going international, and we even wrote a post about that. But what we've realized is we can actually gain a lot more margin in the business if we actually focus on kind of cutting some of our costs. We're going to put that off, right? Or we're thinking about a slightly different strategy to go to international. You just don't really know. I especially think in the world of sales, we make a ton of assumptions about our prospects and the people we're about to get on the phone with. And so it's really, really important to, one, do your homework, be super prepared, have examples of other people just like the person you're getting on the phone with. And I want names and titles. I don't give a shit about the company. Excuse me. I don't care about the company. I just care about the person and their role, because that's what I'm comparing myself to.
Right.
I use Sarah Franklin, CMO at Salesforce. That they're like, oh, wow, okay, CMO at Salesforce, it's huge. Do you necessarily see yourself exactly like Sarah? Maybe you don't. I don't know. But that's just one example. I may have to pick a couple that I think are more relevant. But look, at the end of the day, having a prepared mind means you're coming to the conversation with some hunches. And as a buyer, I want you to come to me with what you think my world might be like.
That's right.
That's what I want you to do. I don't want you to come to me with a whole bunch of questions. I want you to come to me with a hypothesis. And by the way, as the recipient of this, I get to then tell you whether or not you're right or wrong. And here's the good news. It doesn't matter if you're wrong, because what it shows is you put in the effort.
That's right.
I swear, if I ever hear a rep say, tell me about, those words alone, CROs, listen for these words. Tell me about. The moment you say that, you put all the onus on me as the buyer to tell you something.
That's right.
Right? And again, I'm not saying don't do this at all, but you got to earn the right, get there. You got to earn the right to say, well, I'm curious. So tell me about how you handled that in this situation. Cool. But that's only because I came to the conversation. I was super prepared. I had a hypothesis about your world and what it might be like and some of the problems you might be struggling with yourself. Right. And then I had some customer examples of people that I thought were pretty similar in some of the things that they shared with me. And fundamentally, what I'm really trying to validate is what your current world is like.
That's right.
And that's it, right? Like the core of this. So hypothesis about what's going on in the industry, hypothesis about what's going on in your company, hypothesis about what's going on with you and your world and the problems you might be struggling with. Bring some company examples in as again, building credibility there. And then fundamentally, what I'm really trying to understand is why might you change away from what you're currently doing?
Exactly.
And that's it. That's the core of to me, that is a real business conversation, and it's so not discovery. But you notice there's going to be questions and answers in that whole process. So that's what I mean. It's this hypothesis-based approach versus discovery, it just drives a different behavior. And that's why I kind of want to get away from this word discovery, because just for the last 30 years, I've used it as a crutch.
And this reframe to the hypothesis, this reframe to the business conversation is really important, Doug. And the other thing I would say is that you talked about the fundamentals and people getting lazy. If you're going to talk to, I'll use me as an example. If I'm prospecting to another company and I want to get in front of that chief revenue officer, I don't want to go into that conversation without having spoken to anybody on her team. To earn that conversation, to earn that meeting, I'm going to be reaching out to individual AEs, individual SDRs, frontline managers, regional directors, VPs, whatever it is, and just canvas as much as I can of her field sellers to give me 5-minute conversation. I'm just curious to understand how you're approaching the forecasting or sales analytics or pipeline management, deal inspection, whatever it is. Just tell me about how you're doing this so that I don't look like an idiot when I get in front of your CRO.
Okay. I'm going to call you out on a couple things. I love that approach, but I'm going to call you out on a couple things. Even with the AEs or the office manager or the pre-sales leaders or whoever it may be, I still want you to go to those conversations with a hypothesis. I just heard you say, tell me about blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, time out. Like, just get rid of that and go to every conversation with a hypothesis. Like, I've got a hunch that, as an AE, here's what you might be using. Here's what you might be dealing with. Because I just talked to this other AE or SDR. And so the approach, genius. The tactic or the conversation, I still think you can apply the same kind of philosophy of like walk into every conversation with a hunch. It's not necessarily that hard. I say in every interaction, you need to be focused on 3 things. What? Building connection, demonstrating some level of credibility, what you're doing, and showing empathy.
Yes.
Like what you just demonstrated, all 3 of those three of those things exist in that exact exercise. And oh, by the way, now when you're going to talk to a CRO, you're like, hey, listen, I have, over the course of the last couple of weeks, I've spoken to all these folks. Here's one of the problems in our world, and I'm actually really curious your thoughts on this, Kyle. So one of the problems is we don't incentivize that behavior. So one of my issues, like I wish our SDRs were doing that.
Yep.
So I wish our SDRs were on like 100% base comp plan with some objectives, some MBOs, and they get bonuses. And so they can help me go have those 10, 12, 13 conversations with people all around the organization to help kind of further develop my prepared mind so that when I go have that conversation with a CRO, I'm like, I'm on it.
Yep.
Right. But no, we don't. We say we SDR comp plan and we look at AE activity and it's like, wait a minute. Hold on a second. What are you doing talking to an AE? Why are you wasting your time? It's like, well, because I'm learning.
That's right.
How do we incentivize that?
It's a great question. And we are doing this exactly the way that you're describing, Doug. But the way that we do it is we set the expectation with top down that says, this is what we call revenue development, what our RDRs are going to do. They're going to go and quote unquote, walk the halls as if they had the badge to get into LinkedIn HQ. If they're prospecting into LinkedIn and they're walking around, they will talk to anybody they can talk to. And that's what our team is doing. And so the way that we try and balance is we're still compensating our RDRs on the qualified opportunities that they're creating, but the volume is much lower and the expectation of quality is much higher. And we know that we're playing a long game, and we know that at this account, we're planting seeds that aren't going to bloom for another few months. And that's okay, because we've been doing this for long enough that we're going to avoid like that huge roller coaster that may exist, and we're going to have consistent results.
And I'll tell you, everybody that's listening, that's actually a really, really important exercise to go through, because right now the volume that we used to have 12 months ago doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, you might have just cut a whole bunch of people and now you're like, oh no, do I have enough, good quota capacity to actually get to my targets? What do I do about pipeline and SDRs? I'd say like double down on doing more research and being more thoughtful about every interaction and the value of each interaction. I call them meaningful interactions, MIs. How many MIs did you have today? And let's walk through and evaluate whether or not that was a real MI or that was just a conversation with somebody kicking the tires. And to me, there's a ton of value in that, because look, as a strategic AE, this is what I'm doing. I'm talking to everybody. If I got 5 accounts, I'm spending all my time talking to anybody and everybody so that I can develop that prepared mind, so that the meaningful conversations that I have a pretty solid hunch about what's going on and why changing away from what they're currently doing might make sense, right? It's just kind of simple. Why change? The second piece of that, of course, is why now. You can't get to why now, though, until you get to why change.
That's right.
The other thing is, and this is a little twist, this will throw off some folks, especially you pre-sales folks, but by default as a buyer, half the time I'm like, just show me the product. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but I don't care. Just show me the product. That's a total deflection. That means like, you and I are not on the same page. So I'm not listening to you anymore. I need to see the product to actually understand what the hell you're talking about. I want you to say no. So tell me about Clary. No. Show me the product. Nope. Sorry, not going to do it. If any sellers listen to this, they're like, what the hell are you talking about? The reason is, and I'm not saying don't just say no. You have to say no. I don't feel like I've earned the right to. However, if you give me 3 minutes, I think we can get there. Now all of a sudden, you're like, one, you respect my time. Two, you recognize the fact I don't want you to just show up and throw up. I want us to have some real meaningful interaction, meaningful conversation. Now, in order to do so, at the moment, if I say, yes, you've got 3 minutes, now they're like, okay, so Kyle, thinking about our conversation together today, one of the things I was thinking about what's going on in the greater, software ecosystem right now. It's like, it's kind of a mess and it's kind of scary and valuations come down. And I'm sure, as I've heard from other CMOs, there's some concern about, hey, how do I generate pipeline when everybody's everything's on hold, right? So I'm thinking about industry. I'm thinking about company. Now I'm thinking about you as a CMO. I am hypothesizing about what's going on, right? And I'm like, hey, I was just talking to my good friend, Sarah, she's a great friend. And, she was sharing with me the new strategies that they're trying to employ there over at Salesforce. How is this landing with you so far?
That's exactly right.
Do you see the difference? The only question that I've really asked is like, how's this sitting with you? Am I on track or off track? Really, that's all I'm trying to understand. And then your job is just to validate or refute where we're heading.
Exactly.
Because then I can hypothesize about what your world is like even further, and then we can have a deeper conversation about that. Fundamentally, though, what I'm really trying to get to is like, if I really truly understand what your world is like and what your whole world, industry all the way down to your role, then we can have a really interesting and honest conversation about why changing might make sense.
It's really well said, Doug. And the outcome of this is not just creating pipeline. And again, I'll challenge our revenue leaders who are listening to rethink things a little bit here. It's about creating high velocity pipeline, which is to say, like every revenue leader knows that not all revenue is created equal. Probably have some customers that you wish weren't customers because they're either the cost to serve is way too high or the chance they churn is way too high or whatever it may be. Not all revenue
utilization's really low.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Same exact thing for pipeline. Not all pipeline is created equal. And if you are expecting your reps just to churn through accounts and quote unquote create pipeline, you're only thinking about half the equation. The other half of the equation is it needs to be pipeline that's actually going to close, that actually has a chance of closing. And so by approaching conversations this way, by taking this consultative approach to not qualification, not discovery, but a meaningful business conversation, you are increasing the odds that you actually create high velocity pipeline.
Yeah. Great exercise for all of you revenue leaders out there, even Rev Ops leaders. Go talk to your reps, go through their current existing pipeline, whatever's kind of late stage, and just do the reverse exercise. Be like, great, cool. Tell me about their current state and tell me in their words why they think they might want to change away from that. And if your reps don't have a really clear, concise answer, I challenge you whether or not you have a real opportunity. I'm just saying. Now, of course, the second half of that, let's say there's an opportunity that they think they're committing. They're like, and you're like, I don't know, you're kind of good looking through Salesforce, like something smells feels a little off, your gut's kind of shaky. Like, okay, cool. So help me understand in their words why changing now makes more sense than waiting 3, 6, 9 months.
Bingo. And it sounds kind of silly to say this, Doug, but you as a revenue leader, certainly as a revenue operations leader, create those fields in Salesforce, in your CRM, on your opportunity record, literally field name, open test, why change, new field, open text, why now? You create the right behaviors by creating the right incentives. This has been amazing. And I'm going to switch gears. And we only have a couple minutes left, and I'm opening an enormous can of worms, but I'd be remiss not to ask you about AI. You mentioned a little bit about how AI can help the research process and productivity and things like that. But talk to us generally about what you think AI is going to do to the wide world of go-to-market.
If I'm a revenue leader, I'd worry that AI is going to potentially make our sellers even more lazy.
Mm-hmm.
I worry about that. I'm not saying it's true. I don't know if it's true. I think AI can accelerate all the research, all the insights that we're looking for. It can even literally build a hypothesis for you for every single interaction you're about to have. You literally put in a person's name and they're putting their LinkedIn profile, their name and title, and boom, it'll spit out a hypothesis about them that is connected to your world. Like, that's common, no question. I think it's great. I think that just means you as a rep need to be better prepared for that conversation. All of you enablement leaders, spend your time focusing on the conversation, not how you got to the conversation, because I think all of that activity getting to the conversation is going to be dramatically different. That's where AI is going to accelerate a lot of behaviors. But then guess what? It's going to be like the perfect SDR. It's going to hand you a meeting with someone who's, who fits kind of your profile. And now you got one shot. You got to nail it. And so I worry that like people are going to rely on AI to, spam emails again, and they're going to rely on the AI to write all their emails and do all their Okay, fine. That's all great because there's a lot of productivity gains there. But I want you to be really cautious and mindful about the conversations that you're going to have. I also think AI is going to help us to mine data even more so, like really, truly help me understand, look for the patterns in all of our existing customers, help me identify what's consistent across all of them. Like help me identify the consistency in terms of like when discounts are asked for, because then I know. So then there's signal that I'm listening for in my conversation. They're like, oh, yeah, my hunch is they're all likely to ask for a discount. So let's get prepared or get ahead of it, right? Or give me some disposition, when it comes to our competitors. Help me build some FUD from a competitor that I've never heard from. I think AI used properly is going to fill a lot of the gaps that unfortunately, sellers in our world of selling, we just have to deal with and we have to navigate now. I use the example of my friends over at Scratchpad. Like Scratchpad came out, I was like, this is awesome. Because everyone we know has a notepad or notes or something, box notes, whatever it is, and taking notes on. And they're like, I got to cut, paste, and transfer all this stuff in Salesforce. Right? It was kind of genius. So like, I do this. I'm taking notes and I'm going to auto fill in the notes for you because you've written this 100 times. And then, by the way, I'm going to push it into Salesforce. I'm going to create a calendar event for this person. I'm going to create all this workflow. So to me, the real value, and to us as a firm, the real value of AI is the workflow.
Yes.
What happened as a result that then makes a person smarter, better, faster. That's the real value of AI. We're not there yet. Yep. In some cases we are, but across the board, we're not.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. And as a marketing leader at Clary, I'd be remiss not to say that Clary's doing a lot for those AI workflows and making life a lot easier.
I see all these companies coming out with this new technology. Like I was talking to Pete Kazanji over at Atrium, and I was like, you're using AI to read through all the data. So I no longer have to translate what the data is telling me. The AI is telling me what the data says. So now I no longer even have to even look at the dashboard. Get my little report.
Exactly. To kind of combine these two thoughts, Doug, the concern that I have, it sounds like is the same one that you have, which is we as operators can't lose our data literacy, and sellers can't lose their ability to think. If you're outsourcing your thinking to AI, you are not going to survive long. So yes, leverage it for productivity gains, leverage it to make your life easier, leverage it to be your chief of staff, but don't ever think that you can just stop actually doing the hard work of critically thinking about the data that you are receiving, and so that you can go and have those meaningful interactions. And that's my fear, is that we're going to outsource so much to a robot that we're not going to actually be able to do anything ourselves.
Right. I have similar fears, my friend. Yeah. Similar fears. But guess what? The power is in our hands. Look, as sellers, the power's always been in your hands. Always.
Yeah.
And it still is. So it's up to you to decide how much you want to give up to technology and how much you want to maintain on your own. As a buyer, there's a lot that I want you to maintain on your own. In particular, it's that having that real meaningful conversation.
That's right. That's right. You got to sell the way that your buyers want to buy. So it was really well said. Okay. We are at time, sadly, because we could talk for hours, and we have, and we will in the future, Doug. Thanks again for jumping on. One last bonus question for you.
Yeah.
Tell me about a book or books in your life that have been really influential. They could be business books or fiction or biographies or whatever it would be. Pick out one or two.
So I've got two, and they're really going to kind of throw a total wrench in everybody's kind of thought about me, because they're not really business books, but they are, but they're not. First one is The Power of Now.
Okay.
The Power of Now is all about, Eckhart Tolle. It's all about just presence. Far too often, and especially with technology, we get so distracted. And I tell you, there's nothing more meaningful and gratifying than actually someone's being fully present in their conversation. And it's even harder when we're using Zoom.
True.
Or recording technology like this. It's super easy. Just click, the window spread. You think I'm looking at you, but I'm actually looking at the email and I'm writing to you. Dude, we all do it, right? And so
I've been watching cat videos this whole time.
That's impressive, because the fact that you're able to context switch so quickly from cats to revenue is amazing. So The Power of Now is one of my all-time favorite books because it's just a great reminder. And another one is really going to kind of screw people up. It's called The Way of the Superior Man. And it is not what it sounds like, meaning it's not like a, male power book, but it is a great book about kind of like just human relationships and our role as men in the world as it stands today. This isn't about like power dynamics between men and women. It's just more about our role as men, because we struggle with different things in this world than what women do, and then what children do, than what people in different cultures do. It's a really, really interesting and healthy reminder of what it means to be a man.
Unsurprisingly thoughtful. Really appreciate it, Doug. Anything people should know about you, about Emergence? Where can people go to learn more?
Yeah, if you're building a B2B enterprise SaaS company that happens to be Gen AI related, feel free to reach out to me. Just ping me on LinkedIn. Doug Landis on LinkedIn. Find me, shoot me a note, send me a deck if you have one. We are so big on Gen AI. We've also had this thesis around Gen AI for 8 years. We call it Coaching Networks, and Chorus and Textio, and a number of companies have been investments of ours to kind of build on that thesis. So the whole thing about, using technology to make humans smarter, better, and faster, and that's largely what these large language models are doing. We're deep in it. So if you've got a enterprise SaaS company that is leveraging Gen AI in really interesting ways beyond just being a wrapper over OpenAI, then let's talk.
Amazing. Doug, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Have a lovely rest of your day, my friend.
You too, my friend. Good seeing you.
Don't let what you heard today go to waste. Take 2 minutes to download today's checklist to get your priorities in line for the week. You can find that linked in our show notes. And if you liked what you heard, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. We'll be back next Monday with more to help you win your week.